Hey Edward, thank you so much for being here today. We're super excited to get to interview you. I would love if you could introduce yourself.
Courtney, good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Edward Di Gangi. I'm the author of the book, The Gift Best Given, a memoir. And it's a story of adoption, search, discovery, and reunion set against the backdrop of the glamorous ice skating shows in the 1940s and 1950s. And in a nutshell, it was my search for the woman who placed me for adoption at the time of my birth back in 1948.
I love that. Would you be able to tell us a little bit more in depth about your book?
Sure, it's the book, well, in granular detail, it's about 355 pages long. It originally started out as just a recording of the process I went through to search for my birth mother. And I didn't start that process until quite late in my adulthood. I was 69 years old at the time. And it it started out as just recording the journey itself. And then as I discovered more, it became a volume that talked about where my mother had been and what she had done. But the more I found out about her, the book turned into a homage to my mother for her strength and her focus and and the decision she ultimately made to place me for adoption, which had to be very difficult, and it gave me a great appreciation for what women who place children for adoption go through, not only in the making the initial decision, but the weight they carry as they go through their life afterwards.
So true. That's so amazing. What inspired you to write your book?
Well, the bigger question, I guess, is what got me searching in the first place, and I think it was just a combination of things. I had an idyllic childhood with my adoptive parents, and never they were the only parents I ever knew, and I thought of them as my mother and my father. And periodically I would think about, gee, I wonder who my mother really was. Gave little thought to who my father had been. Uh, but then, there was more and more of the DNA testing that was being talked about. There were TV shows with people searching out their heritage. And I had read a book called The Lost, The Search for Six of 6 Million. And it was written by Daniel Mendelsohn, who's a classicist, but he went on a search to find out what happened to six of his relatives who perished in the Holocaust. And obviously he knew that they had perished in the Holocaust, but he wanted the specifics. And he went on a worldwide journey to find that out. And I was really inspired by his story and what he had been through. And I knew I could not do it on the same kind of budget that he did. And that I probably would not be traveling to Poland or Australia or any place else, but I could still go on a search. And it just started out as a little bit of an exercise and turned out to be a much bigger story than I had ever imagined.
I love that. When you were writing your book, who were you thinking of when it comes to who your book is for?
Interestingly, I discovered early on that my birth mother had been a celebrity performer in the big ice shows in the 1940s and the 1950s. She skated with Ice Follies and later with Holiday on Ice. And I thought that my audience would be the ice skating community. And there was interest in the community. I think part of the reason that there wasn't quite as much as I thought it was just the age. The folks who would have known my mother or been have of her era, unfortunately, were fewer and farther between than I originally thought. But what I found, was the audience for the book were really, by and large, mature women. When I say that, probably in the 45 and 50-year-old and up, because I think they could relate to the era. They related to the glamour, and uh, so many have come to me at book club meetings or at signings and said, I know somebody who was adopted, or I was adopted, or I myself gave up a child. So there was an audience that the book touched that, that I hadn't anticipated to start with.
I will say, just from personal experience, that a lot of people, even people who are partially adopted just by one parent, things books like this can touch them because it's something that they can relate to that other people may not have the experience with.
Yeah, and I think the truth is though is I think I've heard some number like one out of every four people in some way is touched by adoption, either having been adopted or having adopted or having surrendered a child. And it's a phenomenal number when it comes down to it.
Yes.
And not everybody's experience was as good as mine. Mine was a very good experience. There are a lot of people who don't feel nearly so good about their own stories and are looking for closure and some happiness attached to it.
So true. How long have you been writing?
It's interesting. I'm trying to think where I heard it, but somebody talked about the fact that they made their first written submission to a publication handwritten on a piece of colored paper. And it made me think that probably back when I was 8, 9 years old, I sent something off to Boys Life magazine, which published for Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts back in the time. Yeah, as far as creative writing or as literary writing, it's been very sporadic. I had a professional career that required lots of business communication. And there were some of my employees who tell me some of that was pretty creative in itself. But yeah, I did some journalistic writing for some specific magazines that were special interest magazines. At one time, I was very involved with Appaloosa horses, and I wrote for a local journal I'm a fly fisherman. I've written for fishing journals. This was my first major step into truly telling a long and involved story.
I love that. What made you really sit down and start to write this book? I know, or on the other side of it, really start to dig into your adoption.
Well, as I dug in, I found more and more. At first, I just thought, okay, I will write down and I'll keep track of what I've done. And the more I discovered, and this is a journey that was just filled with lots of coincidences, lots of serendipitous events, and any number of truly, truly wonderful, generous people who became contributors. That's when I felt that I really needed to start fleshing this out. And I've got a good friend who I would have coffee with in the morning. And the more I tell him about what it was I discovered, he'd be sitting there saying, you really need to write a book. And he wasn't thinking this book, this is not what he was anticipating, but he sort of got me to the point where, okay, every morning we'd meet for coffee and then we'd go up to the local library and sit down and write. He was writing a book about restaurants at the time. And I started writing down my findings, and it just swelled. I had a boss who used to say it was like liver. The more you chewed on it, the bigger it got. And that's what was happening with it.
I love that. What is your schedule like when you're writing your book?
Well, at the time, I was real disciplined when I finally got started, and it really was a case of we'd meet for coffee at 8 o'clock, we'd drink until 9 o'clock, and 9 o'clock. Fortunately, the library was just up a flight of stairs from where we were. We'd go up there and probably sit at the library and either research or write, or sometimes just compare notes from 9 o'clock until I'd say lunchtime. And then I would still come home and probably do more research. And I love the research part. I'm fascinated by that. I enjoy creating a sense of place. And fortunately, in this book, I was familiar with many of the places, but my birth mother traveled widely, and there were a lot of places I've never been. Some I've been to since I wrote the book, and I know they've changed. I know the current place is different than it was when she was there in the 1940s.
Amazing. What do you need in your writing space to help you stay focused?
Oh Lord, I was thinking about that the other day because I'm writing. I've begun writing a sequel to this book. My mother had a very interesting life after she had surrendered me for adoption, and I'm trying to write about not only her travels but the psychological baggage that a woman carries after giving a child up for adoption. Um, I could tell you what I could not use. That would be an internet connection because I get easily distracted. I just too easily. If I could sit in a black hole and just type, I would probably do myself a great favor. And if what I should do is build a shed in the backyard, not have Wi-Fi in it, and then I'd get a lot more done.
I love that. What is your favorite writing snack or drink?
Uh, I guess just a glass of water by the side. My wife is very good to me. She buys me bags of jalapeno pistachio nuts, and I'll sometimes binge on those pretty well. But then you need the water to wash them down.
Yes, so true. What books do you enjoy reading?
I'm currently finishing Moby Dick, which has been a bigger piece than I intended to bite off. I was actually sitting at a book signing in a store up in Virginia back over Labor Day weekend, and I saw it sitting there on the shelf, and it was just a beautiful volume, and said, "I've never read Moby Dick. Let me do that." And I've been plodding through that. I'm down to the last 30 pages now. Uh, I like. I'm a fan of Philip Roth. I've enjoyed reading John Updike recently, and I'm a big fan of Michael Cunningham. Michael Cunningham wrote the book The Hours, on which the movie was based, and he got me reading a little bit of Virginia Woolf as well. So it's kind of an eclectic mix.
That's amazing. I know you touched briefly on this at the beginning, I believe, but are there any books or authors that inspired you to become a writer?
Well, yeah, Mendelssohn was certainly the inspiration for the book, and had it not been for my reading The Lost, I don't know that I would have sat down and started writing. I'm retired, which gives me some time. And, I think, I've had conversations with people that have inspired me. And, perhaps I would have sat down and written about other parts of my life. And I think one of the great things about getting a little bit older is you look back and you realize if you've been wise at all, you've had all sorts of experiences. And it's great to capture them. I've done some memoir along that way in the form of short stories. And again, it's not necessarily because of the books that have inspired me, but the people who have inspired me who were readers and enjoyed their reading.
Amazing. What books did you grow up reading? Did you have a favorite?
I've heard that question before, and I've tried to think back. Um, I remember a book in my early childhood, and I've looked for it since and have not found it. It was called The Black Opal. And this goes back, oh, well over 60 years now. And I found lots of other books called The Black Opal, but not this one. It was just, it was a young adult mystery book. The Hardy Boys were real big. I enjoyed those, and periodically I'll go to a thrift store or something, and you'll see a whole shelf of every Hardy Boys book, and I keep on thinking I should do that. I should buy that and read them all over. And my wife would kill me if I brought them home. Uh, I've enjoyed some adventure books, which I've kept. It's a book called Americans on Everest, which was about the first American Mount Everest expedition back in the early 1960s. Uh, and John Steinbeck, I love John Steinbeck from the first time I read him. I think the first of his books that I read was Cannery Row. I was attracted by the cover on the book, and I never looked back after that. And I still have a 1960s edition of The Grapes of Wrath downstairs.
That's amazing. On the opposite side of that, now as an adult, what is your favorite series or author?
If I had to say it, I guess Michael Cunningham, because I think he writes about a time that I'm familiar with in the largely set in the New York City era, and a place that I'm familiar with. And he writes beautiful stories with poetic prose. He's just a brilliant writer. My only disappointment there is he doesn't write enough books for me. I did just recently hear him on a podcast saying that he's got a new novel which he has sent to his editor, and so I'll have something to look forward to there. Philip Roth wrote 30 odd novels, and one is a little bit different than the next, but again, it was 19 again in the 1960s, and wrote right up until the early 2000s, and so there's a wealth of reading there. And I've read a lot. I've not nearly finished it all, but I will. So that's a favorite author as well.
I love that. What would you tell someone just starting out with reading again?
That's a difficult question. I guess decide what it is that interests you. What captures your imagination, and shop it around. And life is too short for bad books, and there are a lot of books out there. Pick one up in the genre that appeals to you. If it rings your bell, keep on reading and look for more by that same author. If it doesn't, put it away and find another book. And you will find books that capture your imagination, and just make you feel good inside. And I guess read widely. Keep on get out of your genre too. Look at things that maybe you're not familiar with, because books will take you many places, and they'll introduce you to many people you might not otherwise meet.
So true, so true. I love that. On the opposite side of that, what would you tell someone just starting to write their own book?
Don't become discouraged, because you will at some point get 20 pages or 50 pages or 100 pages in and say, this is terrible. Don't listen to yourself. If you need to, put it aside for a little bit, come back and sit down, come up with some sort of a writing practice where, whether it's a page a day or the half hour that you can find in your life, devote that to your writing, and then don't give it up. I think the other thing is there are also many libraries, many senior centers, many community organizations have writing clubs or writers clubs. I go to one, and I find it's good, because when I'm slacking off, I still have that feel that, okay, the meeting is coming up next Tuesday. I need to come in there with something in hand. And it gets me sitting down and writing again. And, and it's good to get other people's opinion of what you're doing. People will ask you questions. People will tell you probably too many will tell you it's good. But I think the more you write, the more you want to go for a serious group that will critique your work. And I think it's worth getting that feedback, and you can then do with it what you wish.
So true. What is one thing that people are generally surprised to find out about you?
Hmm. Um, well, I was sitting with a lady yesterday. I went to a book launch yesterday, and I was sitting to a woman who is the regional representative of one of our writing organizations. And we were just chatting, and I talked about the fact that I am a retired triathlete. That came as a surprise. And then we were talking about back in the 1960s, and I've puttered with it a little bit since, not much. But back in the 1960s, I was fairly creative and productive writing songs, writing music. So that came as a bit of a surprise. And I still have a 1960s magazine cover with my name listed above Bob Dylan's.
I love that.
Yeah, so that's sort of it. Just sort of the odd piece, I guess. I'm pretty much an open book. You know, there's not many secrets out there. So if there's anything that's not known, it's just because I'm older.
It's a very unique thing to have. Is there anything you to say or add?
No, I think I think both writing is a privilege, reading is a privilege. It really is. You know, there's just so much fine literature and storytelling out there, and as I said, can take you to many places. So it's probably preaching to the choir here. Your audience will be readers, but just keep on reading. I don't read nearly as as voraciously as you do, but I always have a book in my hand, and when I finish one, I'm on to the next. I think writing is a privilege as well. We all have stories to tell. Everybody has experienced something. If you have that inclination, take the time and write it down. If it doesn't interest the people immediately around you, maybe a generation from now, somebody will say, "Wow, I never knew that about him." Or as I said, we've got experiences. Write those experiences down. You have dreams, you have fantasies. Somebody will find them as something interesting.
So true, so true. Where is the best place for readers to find your? Some readers love signed copies. Is that an option? And then at least they can connect with you.
Yeah, signed copies are an option. I have a website. It's www.digangiauthor.com. And I'll spell the name. It's Digan like Nancy, GI author.com. And I do ship out signed copies from the website, and you can pay via PayPal there or credit card. The book is widely available. It can be ordered through any bookstore if they don't have it on the shelf. And it's certainly on Amazon. Everything is on Amazon. And it's available there not only as a print book, but also as an ebook. And I should step back. On my website, you can also order the ebook and pay for it there as well. And the book is in libraries as well. I've made a great effort to make it available that way. So if you're on fixed finances or just want to invest so much in books, it's there on Overdrive, and it is also there on Hoopla. And most libraries subscribe one or the other.
And where was the best place that they can connect with you?
You can leave a message on the website, or you can email me at edward.digangi.author@gmail.com. And I'm always happy to get email, always happy to answer questions or take comments. And I guess my final piece here is if you do read the book, I would love to see a review on Amazon, especially if you liked it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here today and telling us about your book and about you. We really appreciate it. I'll be sure to drop those links in your email in the show notes so it's easy for everyone to see. And thank you again.
Courtney, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. Thank you, and best of luck with the podcast. I know it's a new endeavor, and I I'm sure it's going to be well received.